Let's upgrade this shot into something that looks like a final quality production shot. So the first thing this thing obviously needs is a better key. So I'm going to start with the GMAT, or the quick and dirty slap comp hard mat that we created, and I'm going to build this into something better. So this Primat now is going to become our hard mat, and we'll create a little manifold here to connect the rest of our work to. And I think the next thing we need here is a soft mat. So let's generate a soft mat, give ourselves a little bit more space, and for that we're going to use IBK. And we'll start with the IBK color, which will allow us to create an artificial clean plate, and that's going to be important on this shot because the screen is extremely unlevel, unevenly lit. So there's the IBK color, and I'm going to drop down an IBK. Let's get this going first. I will change the size as little as possible, and then use a little bit of erode and patch black. So I want to erode it enough that I don't pull in too much of this contamination. There we go. Erode it enough in that I'm essentially getting screen color. So this is basically growing the mat enough to pull in the clean color of the screen. And then I can use patch black to fill it in here. Now I'll use IBK gizmo to pull my actual mat. So let's see what we got here. Switch this to green. We're getting a pretty good result, but we may be able to do better without damaging the quality of our mat. So I'm going to use the blue-green and red weight, and more importantly the red weight in this case because he's got a lot of red in him, to try to create a slightly more solid mat without damaging the quality of the edges. And it seems like it's doing a pretty good job. I'm going to gamma slam this down to see if we're getting his skin filled in. That'll give us a few less transparent holes in him. I don't want to push it too far because I don't want to accentuate this noise in the screen. Now we may be able to kill some of this noise by doing a denoise before we do this mat. So let me drop down a denoise. Put it right in line here. And I need to pick the area of the screen to get a noise sample to denoise this. So I'm picking there. And I'll switch this to digital. And I'm not even going to touch it because it just has to be good enough to improve the quality of my mat. And denoise it a little bit less because it's starting to affect the quality of my mat overall. There we go. So this is going to be my soft mat. Let's try it without the denoise and with. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep the denoise on there. So this is my soft mat. And we already have a hard mat. We might need like a D-spill here. So let's connect our manifold here, and I'm gonna use a key light for my D-spill. So we're just gonna use key light's built-in D-spill, and we'll see if we can get away with that. And to turn that on, I'm just going to switch the screen color to solid green. And then I'm going to start adjusting these other primary colors. I'm doing this with the mouse wheel by go over the field that I want to edit and rolling the mouse wheel up and down. And I think I want to make my cinder block wall kind of a brownish color. Let's make the cinder block wall, let's kind of grade it to what we want before we start matching the background. So I'm going to put in a grade here. And I wanted to have something that was a little more brownish, let's say. So I'm picking the color wheel on the gain, and I'm going to make the wall a little bit more of a brownish color. More of a dull cinder blocks color. There we go. So that's the color that I'm going to be putting him over. So let's get this background suppressed. So I'm using key light sort of as a fancy unspill by changing these values here. And we'll leave it there for now. We might have to touch it up a little bit more. Actually, I know I'm going to have to touch it up. There's still some green. So to touch this up, I'm going to go in and put in a hue correct. And we'll pick this color here. Just to see what hue it is. And then I'm going to do some green suppression just on that hue. There we go, just to kill that last little bit of green. And let's make sure I'm not hurting his skin tones too much by doing that. There we go. So a combination of key light and hue correct just to do my spill suppression, screen suppression. So now we've already been through this drill before. If you've seen any of my other tutorials, we're going to start setting up our in matte and our out matte. Let's tidy up our view a little bit here, make some space. I'm going to move this screen suppression right underneath there and scoot everything else here together a little bit. And first we'll start with getting rid of all this crud out here. We've already generated this pretty good hard matte here. So I'm going to erode blur to grow that out just a bit. Like this, blobby. This is just a G matte. And I will put this matte inside this matte. So that in that. And that gives me trimmed off matte. And I can adjust my matte here. Until it trims off all the crud but doesn't damage my soft matte. And we'll have to tune that in a moment once we start using it. Do the final fine tuning. But for now, that'll do the trick. Now let's take this same matte and we'll make a core matte out of it. So to do that, I'm going to take this matte and modify it with an erode blur for now. See if this works. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to max it into the core here. I'm taking the maximum of either of these. So it looks to me like it caused my matte to get too big, so let's make sure we erode it enough to fill it in. There we go. Gamma slam this down to see where we're at. There we go. Now I should have a mat that fits him pretty well. Unfortunately, I maxed in everything else, but I'm not really worried about the RGB here. I'm only really worried about the alpha, so we're just going to disregard the RGB on that track. We'll copy this alpha into here. I'm hitting K to copy the alpha from there to there. And now I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm going to do an add mix over the background. There we go. And we'll use the add mix to adjust the quality on the edges a little bit here. Loosen up the mat just a bit. And the background looks like it could use a couple things. Our bounding box is getting huge, and we don't have the option in the add mix node, unfortunately, to control which bounding box we're going to use. So we could either crop it before bringing it in here, or we could crop it after. I'm just going to crop it after. If I drop down a crop node in the shot, in the node graph, it will create that crop node at the resolution of the project. So that should trim it to be correct, and I will select reformat. Will reformat it for me. And now let's do a little bit more sweetening here. Let's try to come up with some color that maybe works better for this. And we'll add a little bit of defocus to the background because it's already more in focus than he is. And we've got to add maybe a little bit of edge blur and shrink this mat just a little bit. This add mix. Shrink it just a smidge and then edge blur it in. Gonna shuffle out the alpha channel. I'm gonna blank the alpha channel of this B track here so that at the bottom here I get the alpha channel of the guy through. And then we'll do an edge blur. Now unfortunately my roto needs a little work there, but I want to keep this demo moving, so I'm going to do a little bit of still tune this mat. Hopefully we can get it all done with this add mix. Yeah, I think we did. And then do an edge blur. And a good target to shoot for when you're doing an edge blur is to make the edge look as blurry as the edges inside the thing you're putting over, but no more blurry than that. The only exception might be is if the edge was very blurry from depth of focus or something like that. So you're aiming for this amount of blurriness on the edge. Okay, now let's get some grain on the background, because right now we have no grain on the background, and we might consider trying to get I don't know. Let's get the basics in there first, the grain, and then maybe we can think about some other sweetening that we do to it. So I'm going to drop down an F grain, and we're going to pull our grain from our original plate. We have to tell F grain what we want it to sample in this original plate. So, because we don't have too many options, we'll use the screen as our grain sample. And it seems to have some grain in it. go forward a frame just to see what we're getting. This has a lot of noise in it, and that can make figuring out the grain kind of tricky. So if we go through here, it's hard to tell how much of this is texture in the background and how much of it is grain. So here's a trick you can do. I'm going to disable this defocus for now, and I'm going to put a blur here. And I'm going to blur the background a lot. Then we'll look at it here after our comp. Let's see, red. There's the red grain. Green and blue. And one thing I forgot to do in the F grain is to sample the grain response. This, sometimes you can really get a much better response just by using the sampled grain response. So I'm going to say sample grain response. And now it will draw the grain more along what it is extracted as the response of the grain amount from the original plate. So let's look at our match again. There's red, there's green, and there's blue. And it seems to have pretty much nailed it just using the sample grain response. So we're done. So now I can disable my blur, my little technical blur there, re-enable my defocus, and let's put a little more defocus back there. Actually, I don't think we went far enough. Let's just put it behind him just a bit. Let's look at the original plate for some reference. You see, the plate wasn't that out of focus, the back wall, because it was a very deep stop that was used to shoot this, but let's exaggerate it just a tiny bit for aesthetic purposes. Now, to do the final version of this shot, you definitely would want to clean up the roto here a bit more, but so far, so good. This is almost done. Maybe we would give this guy a little bit better grade, or maybe we sweeten up this back wall. Let's throw a little gradient or something on that back wall so that it's a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to put in another grade node here, and I'm going to drop down a roto node and connect it to the mask input, and we'll just draw a shape in here that can maybe help us create a slightly more interesting effect on the wall back here. Maybe look like there's a light above him or something, which there was. You can see it shining on his head there. And then we'll use this grade node to just sort of darken the background a bit. Now the problem that we're running into here is that we're not able to see the match moved position of that roto. You can see here. Oh, and we're not actually using... No, it appears that the actual problem is that the roto shape is being cropped to the format. So if we say no clip, we now have a roto shape that can extend out infinitely beyond the format that it's in. So in this case, since we have a format that doesn't match our project, we have to do that. So let's look at it down here after our merge, just to see how we're doing with our crop, our little cheap grade that we're coming up with here. We're going to have to definitely have some creative license on how we create our little fake shadow on the wall. And remember, we unspilled this, so we don't want to darken it too much. Or we'll have to fix our unspill, either one. Or we could maybe adjust that add mix a little bit as well. It's particularly distracting in his hair where it's getting bright, but so let's adjust this add mix just a little to darken him more on his edges. Grow that matte a little bit out a little bit more. There we go. So there's a quick and dirty 100% 2D virtual set approach. You'd want to clean up those rotos a little bit more to finish it. And that would be, in order to do that, you could either probably do it right in the GMAT here because it's close enough that you could touch it up in your outside mat there, or you could create a separate roto to do that. But that's the gist of it. Let's see, let's grade him just a little bit more, and then we'll call it done. Kind of think that he could use a little bit cooler look. I'm gonna use the gain, and I'm gonna take some of the orange out of him by moving his gain more towards blue. Check the black levels really quick just to see where we're at. You might consider flashing his blacks a little bit, but it's hard to say in this case. But we'll do a little bit of that. There we go. So that kind of makes him feel a little bit lifted as much as the background, maybe not quite so much. And put some of the same hue of this background into his blacks. So there you go. Quick and dirty virtual set. Now one step that we skipped was graining the edges of him. And in some cases, you might be able to get away with it. This might be one of those cases. Maybe not. So you'd want to do a flip book because that's always the proof of whether or not you really have that working. Now when I changed the balance of my add mix, I changed the feeling of my edge blur. So I had to retune that there. There we go.